the call. This is a very unique call because we are getting the leaders from both the immigration, which are being represented by Green and Spiegel senior leadership, Mr. Stephen himself and Cristina, and also leading Indian law firm, Mr. Harish Kumar and Rubal Bansal. Again, both the firms bring unique expertise on the table, one side on the immigration side, and secondly, on issues which are equally important for a businessman or a high net worth individuals, issues on the taxation, issues on the residency, issues on the foreign exchange. Because any decision on the international movement or settlement involves the requirement of knowing both the things in detail. So, with that as the objective, we have brought the best of the people on the call today to be able to give an overview. I will like to welcome in this call Mr. Stephen Green, the managing partner for Green and Spiegel, a firm doing excellent for decades now, supported by Cristina Guida. I basically believe her, she to be my immigration guru, and especially in the workforce migration, along with Mr. Harish Kumar, a very senior partner of Luthra and Luthra from its corporate practice, and Madam Rubal Bansal, bringing excellent expertise on the taxation side. So, with that as my starting input, the agenda is right now displayed. Starting with Mr. Stephen Green to talk about why Canada, giving an overview. Again, Canada is a home to many Indians next to the US, so all those good things will be explained. Followed by Mr. Harish Kumar giving an excellent ideas on different aspects of regulatory framework between India and Canada. Further followed with more in-depth about different visa processes because sometimes lack of the knowledge leads you to decide the wrong thing. So having to know the complete detail on different programs will anyway help your process to move to Canada. And lastly, an excellent discussion by Rubal Bansal on residency status, the double taxation treaties, all the good things we keep on hearing, but now is the time to get them in more detail. So with that as a starting point, I will like to now invite Mr. Stephen Green to start the first session. Mr. Stephen Green, over to you, my dear.
Great. Thank you, Ashish. Good evening, good morning to everyone from chilly Toronto today. We are about minus 12 degrees here, but it's a beautiful blue sky and a wonderful day for a webinar on the gateway to global business. So as indicated, Cristina and I are from the law firm of Green and Spiegel. We are the largest boutique immigration firm in all of Canada. We have 40 lawyers that assist us with respect to the movement of people to Canada as well as to the United States of America. And we really do have a global presence with respect to the movement of people into Canada. And really, why Canada? Canada has been recognized as one of the top countries in the world to live in. And we believe in a concept called multiculturalism. And unlike the United States, where you come to the United States, you enter the United States, they kind of mix you up into a big pot and they want you to come out as an American. We don't believe in that in Canada. We want you to come to Canada, keep your culture, teach us about your culture. And that is one of the greatest things about Canada. In Toronto, where Cristina and I live, 52% of the Canadian citizens that live in Toronto were not born here. So you can see how important and diverse this concept is of multiculturalism. We have universal health care, meaning that a rich person or poor person is treated exactly the same in our medical system. It is against the law for a doctor to charge you to do medical procedures in Canada because of our universal health care. And the government now is even expanding it to situations where people need dental care. So we really are a country of universal health care. Our crime rate is quite low in Canada. It is against the law pretty much to have a handgun in Canada. So Cristina and I, if we wanted to get a handgun, we'd have to go to the United States of America to get a gun. But in Canada, we're not allowed to carry guns. Cristina, maybe you can talk about the levels of immigration now that the government is looking at.
So with respect to the immigration plans, I mean, as Stephen had mentioned, Canada is, we're based on immigration, and a big part of our population has to do with immigrants coming to Canada, and a big part of that is economic immigration. So as you can see, the minister has announced what the plans are for the next 2 years or so, and as you can see, economic immigration is the largest category. So up until 2026, we have over 300,000 immigrants that Canada would like to bring into the country. So there's no restrictive policies for foreign nationals in the past quarter. So Canada is really reliant on immigration, despite what's being discussed in the news recently. If anyone is following Canadian immigration in the news, immigration and specifically students are being said that because of the housing crisis, a lot of it has to do because of foreign workers or foreign students that are coming in. But the reality is immigration, we need immigration in Canada, and the numbers themselves will dictate that. So what we'll be seeing with the Canadian government, and as we go through the different categories, is Canada is going to be taking a very specific approach in terms of who they would like to come into Canada, and economic categories are the key indicators. You'll also see on the chart that family is a big part of immigration as well. In the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, we do have legislation that speaks to family reunification. So that's one of the key tenets of our act, is to make sure that families are reunited. So you can see that reflected in the numbers over the next few years. We also have commitments to refugees and humanitarian efforts. While at the lower end of the quota, it also is a big part of immigration. So you can see the totals over the next few years is essentially $500,000 immigrants per year. So that's a big part of our population. So immigration is a big part of what Canada is, and when we take you through the different categories, you'll see what the government is looking for.
And it's interesting talking about, the levels and the government of Canada. The current government in power are called the Liberals. And yes, they've certainly increased the amount of immigrants that Canada needs. And they based a lot of that thought process on the requirement of skilled workers to help us with our labor force, to help us build homes. But there's been a rise in Canada with respect to the concern of this number of new immigrants coming into Canada, and where are they going to live? So the government is currently looking at this very seriously, and most likely, if the current government loses in the next election, which is to occur in about a year and a half, then I think you may see these numbers reduced by the next party that wins. So it's quite interesting to see, the discussions now about what's going to happen with the levels of immigration. But currently, you basically will see numbers of 500,000 new immigrants to Canada during 2024, and I would say at least 2025. But after that, we're just not sure what the levels are going to be. Now, unlike the United States, where they have this concept of, I really call it an alphabet of visas, where you may heard of something called an L visa, an O visa, P visa, and then you have permanent visas, which are EB5s and various EB programs, Canada really only has two categories of immigration. One is temporary programs and one is permanent programs. So if you are looking at the temporary programs, basically what Canada says is that you are permitted to enter Canada as a temporary resident visitor. And in that area, you can enter as a visitor with permission to visit, with permission to work as a visitor, and with permission to study as a visitor. So you see, everyone comes in as a temporary resident visitor, and then they're granted this extra sort of ability either to work, study, or just remain as a visitor. Then the other group of people are permanent residents of Canada, and those are people that want to remain here permanently in Canada. And there are various pathways that Cristina and I will talk about as how to get permanent residence. But they're two totally separate programs, and it's important to understand that. So let's talk about the first important temporary program that Canada has. Canada has recognized that certain occupations or certain skills are desperately needed in Canada. And they went around and spoke to various immigration lawyers, business people, colleges, really the Canadian public. And they heard from the Canadian public that in some circumstances, processing of temporary entry for skilled workers is too cumbersome, too difficult, too long. So they went ahead and looked at this, and they decided to create a special program called the Global Skills Strategy. And what this does is that it says to businesses that the Canadian government is committed to processing certain temporary workers or temporary entry of certain people on a very, very fast process. And in some circumstances, the person can enter Canada within 10 days, depending, of course, on what country they're coming from. But it's a very, very fast process. And Cristina, maybe you want to talk a little bit more about the, application of work permit exempt types of situations for people that are coming here for a short period of time. What does the government say about that?
So if we go to the next slide, we're talking about short duration options. So as Stephen mentioned, the Canadian government is looking to facilitate executives and high-skilled individuals into Canada on a priority basis. So as part of the global skills strategies, one of the things that the government identified was having individuals come into Canada for short durations of time that they could come into Canada without work authorization. So what that means is they could come in as visitors, so they could work without a work permit. And what they've said is that if you're in a high skill level employee, so example, an executive that wants to come in and do a project, or maybe a management consultant that wants to look at a specialized project and has to, there's a very definitive timeline, they can come into Canada without a work permit, and they can come in for 1 to 15 days, do the work. They can leave for 6 months and come back for another 15 days. Or if the duration of the project is over 15 days and up to 30 days, they can come into Canada, work without that authorization. So what is key about this category is that it avoids, as Stephen had said previously, it avoids having to apply for the work permit, having to do all the work permit documents, and allows them to come into Canada very quickly. So specifically, if you're from a visa exempt country, you can, be signed on to a project on Monday and you can be in Canada on Tuesday. From visa required countries, you would still have to apply for the TRV, but you can come into Canada without applying for that special work authorization. So these short duration work permit exemptions are key to businesses that want to come in, do quick work and leave. And it's also a good gateway to find a way into the Canadian labor market to see if there's other projects they can work on, and then you can find other options to come into Canada to work on long-term projects or other clients that you can sign on to do work. And the other thing to be mindful of is business visitors. So in Canada, as Stephen mentioned previously, you have visitors that are just coming in. They don't need work permits. You have workers, but you can come into Canada as a business visitor as well if you're coming in to attend meetings, if you're coming in to do any after sales work, if you're coming in to do a board meeting, anything like that. You don't need work authorization. You're able to come into Canada, do these very simple business meetings, and then return to your home country. So it doesn't require that specific work authorization.
So Cristina, under this Global Skills Program, then, if I'm living in India and I'm coming to Canada and there's a company in Canada that needs me for 30 days, I'm a very, high skilled worker, I can come and actually get paid. I can actually work in Canada for up to 30 days during the full year. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. And what's great about that is there's no compliance issues, there's no work permit and all the the offer of employment that's done with it, the compliance. It's a very simple thing. You come in, finish the project in the 30 days and you leave, and you can keep doing that with different clients as well. So if you're a management consultant, as I said before, you can come in, do the project within those 30 days and then come for another project. So it's a great option.
And I guess that makes sense because, we want to help the Canadian economy, Canadian businesses. Why make someone go through the whole process of getting a work permit, perhaps even needing some type of labor certificate, if they're only coming for a very short duration? So it's a great example of how the Canadian immigration policy is facilitating businesses in Canada.
Exactly.
So I think that's us up to now.
Perfecto. No, I think that was an excellent start, Stephen and Christina. And now, rightfully, again, all the question answers would be kept towards the end. So we'll go through the second section now, and I welcome Mr. Harish Kumar to give a overview of the regulatory and the other framework impacting such international movements. Over to you, Mr. Harish Kumar.
Hi everybody. This is Harish Kumar. I'm partner at Luthra and Luthra Law Offices, India. So I'm placed at New Delhi, the capital of India, which is the headquarters of the firm. So I'm joined here with my colleague Rubal, who has been sort of heading the taxation, practice of the firm. So just a bit about the firm, the firm Luthra and Luthra is a full service law firm. We are in operations for last more than 3 decades. As I mentioned, we are headquartered at New Delhi, and we have all of offices across metropolitan cities, including Bombay, Hyderabad, Bangalore. So we are a team of about 300 plus lawyers, including 62 partners. And if you talk about myself, I'm per se into the corporate governance, commercial law related practices. I'm into this profession for us about more than 2 decades. So very briefly about the firm being a tier 1 law firm, this is well recognized by various chambers partners, including Asia Pacific. They have ranked our 13 practice areas on various lawyers, which keep updating on year-to-year basis. We are well recognized by people, Legal 500 Asia Pacific, Benchmark Litigation Asia Pacific. We have been awarded as the top 100 world's best data law firm in the year 2022. In fact, 2 years back, we got the Deal of the Year award when ArcelorMittal, they have acquired the SR which is the kind of transaction for the year in terms of the overseas acquisitions in India. So this is brief about the firm. Now let us just take you through about the regulatory framework, including taxation vis-a-vis immigration to Canada. So while I will take it forward with the high-level regulatory framework in respect of immigration related aspect between India and Canada, so my colleague Rubal will be taking care of the relevant tax aspect. Now, broadly speaking, about I think the earlier speaker, Stephen has already mentioned about why Canada. So in a way, I'm going to supplement only. So if when can you go to the previous one actually? Yeah, this one, yeah. Yeah, so why Canada? It is a kind of supplement to what Stephen has mentioned about. So if you say, in fact, while the people have been sort of preferring maybe Canada as first sort of destination in terms of migration, so I would say India is the kind of key contributor to a global migration. You talk about the report issued by Indian Ministry of External Affairs, there are about 13.6 million non-resident Indian NRI. There are about 18.68 million person of Indian origin, and nearly about 33 million overseas citizens of India who are the OCI card holder who have been residing outside India. So every year, on an average, India is contributing about 2.5 million people, who are migrating, overseas. And obviously, Canada remains one of the preferred destination because of the inherent reasons, as also mentioned by Stephen. So if you talk about the data in the first 6 months of last year, about 84,000 Indians have already migrated to Canada. I'm sure the number is going to be higher if you compare to the corresponding year, this year, but that's data which is in place. And again, why we would be preferring going to Canada, primarily on account of reasons, including slightly sort of highly regulated atmosphere, regulatory framework in India in terms of the remittance rules. Indian passport is certainly not like that of a global entry, which is available to Canada. Canada is a preferred passport. It's a kind of global entry once you get it issued. So a better yeah. So can you come to the next one, please, Ashish? Yeah. So here is the key reasons if you talk about why we will be preferring to Canada. So in terms of the kind of scope of better income. So if you see the data about the per capita income in India, I'm talking about 2021. So Canadian, per capita income is about 20 times higher than that of the Indian, per capita income. So better standards of living and the social security. Again, Canada has been performing well in many dimensions in terms of well-being relative to other countries. If you compare, in the context of the Better Life Index, Canada has certainly outperformed the average in income, job, education, health, environment. Importantly, in social, safety standards, air quality. Again, Canada remains, I think, consistently, high in terms of air quality amongst the key country across the world. If you unfortunately, if you talk about India, cities like metropolitan cities, in fact, we are placed. So we are living in sort of low air quality. In fact, which is in a way dangerous to the health. So that has become one of the prime reasons, if you ask me, for the people. Importantly, the high net worth individuals, and they see what. To be very honest, why we all do have been working, carrying on the business ventures, all about the well-beings, not only of ours, but also of our loved ones, right? Families, kids, children. So that actually has become one of the prominent reasons. If you would ask me personally, and why the people have been preferring, getting migrated to countries like Canada. Same way, better business, opportunities. If you talk about the Canada in comparison to other OECD countries, global visa I have mentioned about, because if you're holding a Canadian visa, and I think you can visit virtually every country. It's a kind of sort of global entry to various countries across the road. OCI card. So okay, I'm probably a citizen of India. I want to migrate to Canada. It doesn't matter that once I'm there in Canada, I'm settling there. Even I would have acquired their citizenship. I have settled there 5 years, 6 years, 10 years down the line. Doesn't matter. I will continue to be availing the relevant privileges, benefits which are otherwise available to the Indian citizens, provided I would have been issued this OCI card. So OCI card holders have been put to some extent in parity with the NRI. So that is a kind of long-term inherent benefit which we do kind of look forward to once we go and get settled in a country like Canada on a long-term basis. Come to the next one, please. Yeah. So this is a brief about the key statistics, in terms of cross-border investment transactions involving India and Canada. So before going into that, I think I'm bound to quote the Honorable Prime Minister, of India. If you would have seen, I think during 2015 visit, his visit to Canada, when he was, I think, completing his second, year under the first, kind of term as the Prime Minister, he quoted very clearly, and the amount of confidence could have been, reflected. One can actually vouch for the amount of confidence. He mentioned that while we talk about India and Canada, they have been doing, tremendously well, like a square plus b square. They have been growing separately as a square, b square. But if you put together Canada and kind of India, you put a whole square, you get an extra 2AB. So this 2AB is nothing but a result of the strong bond and friendship between India and Canada. This is a quote by none other than, the Prime Minister of India way back early, February 2015. So I think these all have been, when he quoted about, he would have, I think, taken clue from the past transactions, business sentiment between the country, which is well reflected in this slide. In terms of India export to country like Canada, it is already, about US 4 point, I know one dollar, US 1.44, billion. And these are data I'm reporting from, basically it's a reported data which I'm quoting here. In terms of, Canada India bilateral trade, there is about, $9 billion. So when you talk about the major contributor in terms of export to Canada, this include drugs, formulations, biologicals, products of iron and steels, marine products. India is one of the largest merchandise trading partner of Canada. And these are only few, let me tell you. The list is actually illustrative, is actually inclusive in nature. So there are many more to add. And this is not the latest one. This is the high level data which I'm sharing here. Coming to the next one. So here is, so what I have tried here, I've tried to give you a kind of high level, sort of, thought about the relevant regulatory affairs in terms of, exchange control regulations. Because if being Indian, if being a citizen of India, residing in India, you are doing any transaction, including migrating to country like Canada, and you are going there on short-term sort of period or with a long-term purpose to stay there, to do some business venture, or maybe to acquiring their citizenship, what impact it may have in short term or in long term in terms of your asset, investment, security, citizenship. So that's all broadly I have covered in this, regulatory framework. Coming to the next one. Yeah. So this is the, I would say, immediate impact, of immigration on the residential status of an individual. So what happens typically, and this change on the residential status is not from tax perspective actually. This is from the Indian Exchange Control Regulations. As you would know that, India is not fully convertible, unlike freely convertible currency, Japanese yen, US dollar, sterling pound, etc. India is not fully convertible. So we do regulate, exchange control sort of transactions. So the moment an Indian resident is basically, living in India for less than 182 days in a year, and he is going out of India to a country, let's say Canada, and the purpose of his going out to Canada is either of the three. Means he has been going to Canada for about, for the purpose of seeking some employment. He's going to Canada for the purpose of, undertaking some business vocation, or maybe for any other purpose. And this is inclusive yet kind of residual list. And this purpose is basically with an intention to stay outside for an uncertain period. So if these two conditions are met, that the person is in India for less than 182 days, at the same time he is going to Canada for any of the three purposes, he becomes a person, a resident outside India. So from person resident in India, he will become person resident outside India if these things happen. So why I'm telling you about the definition of person resident in India, a person resident outside India, because that, under the exchange control regulations, different treatment has been given to a person resident in India, popularly known as PRI, and a person resident outside India. Certainly, because if you are PRI, you will be getting more benefit, advantage, privileges. But if you are a PRY, it would be subject to some kind of regulations, compliance, reporting, and in some cases, sort of approval, rather prohibition also, I would say. Because if you are a PRY, you may not acquire certain kind of immovable property in India, such as agricultural land. You can't do certain sort of trade unless you got the government approval. But if you are PRI, there is no issue of foreign exchange fluctuations. So that's how FAMA treats PRI and PRI differently. But as I mentioned a while ago, in case you are a PRY, but you are having a OCI card, you will get certain benefit advantages which are at par with NRI. Because we want to kind of give some kind of continued benefit privileges to our erstwhile citizens who now happen to be PRI because they are the citizen of a different country like Canada. Coming to the next one, please. So this is the acquisition of the foreign citizenship and the immediate sort of consequences. So if you acquire, as you know that India doesn't allow for dual citizenship. So if you can have either India's citizenship, or if you want to acquire citizenship, let's say of Canada, you have to sort of surrender the India's one. So India citizen who have been acquiring citizenship of Canada, that is a foreign state, so they will cease to be a citizen of India post acquisition of a foreign citizenship. So now these are obligation, immediate obligation on the Indian erstwhile citizen. He has to actually apply for renunciation of his Indian citizenship. So he has to kind of apply for the surrender certificate which is issued by the competent authority in India, and he has to surrender his Indian passport. Now, what is the process to renounce the Indian citizenship? This is very, very sort of, I would say straightforward. You are supposed to just make an online application on the web portal of Ministry of Home Affairs, the kind of competent authority here, and you have to visit to the Indian Mission Post or the office of the district collector, district magistrate to submit such application with the relevant supporting document. So that's the first part. The second part is also that the moment you become the citizen of Canada, and maybe the moment you kind of sort of surrender the Indian citizenship, you have to also sort of surrender all those identification which you would have obtained by virtue of Indian citizenship. For example, classic example, I would say voter ID. So voter ID would have been issued to you in connection with your being the Indian citizen. In that case, you are supposed to surrender the voter ID as well. There is an obligation. But what about PAN? PAN, which is a unique identification number issued by Indian Income Tax Authority. PAN is a document which is not obtained by a person, by an individual, on by virtue of being Indian citizen. It is more to do with the business in Indian territory. So maybe you know that a person who is not resident, non-resident, doing a business in India, he is not a citizen. Still, he is subject to obtaining a PAN. So PAN is not legally required to be sort of a surrender post cessation of Indian citizenship. But yes, you may consider surrendering it. So there is no kind of specific prohibition as such that you can't surrender. At the same time, there is no sort of specific obligation that you must surrender. In fact, it's a kind of, I would say it's more subjective in nature. It's more kind of thought through call which you have to take. For example, let's say you become a non-resident by virtue of being there in Canada, but you have been doing some kind of business in India, directly, indirectly, which is subject to some sort of doing business in India, in terms of the kind of requirement under the Indian Income Tax Act. In that case, probably you have to report certain business leg-related transactions, and you are supposed to continue holding of any income tax. So that's the requirement. So it has to be a thought through implication. But if you ask me, surrender of PAN is your option. You may not, but you are not under any obligation as such. As I mentioned, there is no concept of dual citizenship. So the moment you acquire the citizenship of a foreign country like Canada, we assume and we deem you to be a non-citizen. So obligation is on you actually to come forward and surrender your citizenship. Coming to the next one, please. So these basically are high level pros and cons, as I mentioned a while ago. you cease to be a Indian citizen, and you continue to be a non-resident staying abroad, say in Canada. So we would suggest you, there is no harm, there is no downside of obtaining OCI. Rather, this will give you some benefit. So multiple entry, lifelong visa for visiting India. So no need to get a separate visa. You will get multiple entry because you have been ex-citizen of India. Exemptions from registration requirement for any length of stay in India. And we are giving a general parity, with that of the NRI. So NRI can do certain act, they can do certain actions. So we have provided a parity with NRI to a OCI card holder. For example, like an NRI, OCI card holder is permitted to sort of make investment into India on repaid basis or non-repaid basis, subject to making some kind of compliance and declarations. So we are giving you a kind of equal treatment as that of an NRI. You are free to sort of buy sell equity of listed Indian companies on repaid basis. You are eligible certainly to reapply for Indian citizenship. So like other sort of eligible persons, individuals, even you are a OCI card holder, you are equally sort of entitled. Rather, you if you are a OCI card holder and make an application to sort of acquire our Indian citizenship, again, you will be given a preference. Your application should be on sort of on priority basis, would be disposed of accordingly. So if you talk about the cons, what is the negative side? Whole soul, I would say, you cease to be a Indian citizen. Accordingly, you cannot be registered as a voter. Primarily, it's all about the voting and sort of holding some kind of honorable position like that of the legislative assembly, legislative council, or the parliament. You can't contest for for any such position. You cannot hold the constitutional post, that of the president, vice president, judges of the high court, or that of the supreme court. You may not be eligible to be appointed to the public service in India, and you may not be entitled to sort of equal employment opportunity in the public employment. So these are the high level cons. But if you compare the pros and cons post cessation of Indian citizen, I personally feel, and this is based on our extensive experience on that front, uh, applying and holding a OCI card is I would say generally preferred. You continue getting the additional, or I would say enhanced benefit while staying in Canada. At the same time, you are given kind of preferred treatment in India. So there is no downside. Coming to the next one, please. So this is going to be the treatment of your property, both movable and immovable, including the bank account and security in India. So see, you would have acquired your asset property, in India when you were sort of resident and citizen. So there's not going to be any adverse impact in terms of the legal title ownership to those asset property or security that you would have acquired, because originally you acquired that in the capacity of being Indian citizen, so that is going to be intact. That is not going to be adversely affected. Uh, if you are a OCI card holder, or basically a non-resident, you can transfer the property after renunciation of the Indian citizenship, as I mentioned a while ago. Yeah. So the moment you become a non-resident, so there is a kind of treatment in terms of operation of your respective bank account. If you are a OCI card holder, then you can continue to operate your existing NRE account or NRO account or FCNR account with the respective authorized dealer bank in India. However, in case you are non-resident, but you have not applied for any OCI card, in that case you can only operate an RO account. So accordingly, based the moment you cease to be a citizen, so it depends upon whether or not you have been a kind of holding OCI card. You have to sort of coordinate, communicate with your bankers in India to get the change in the system status and the operation of your respective bank account. There is no impact on the operation of NRE NR account, which is linked to your demat account and the security thereof. So demat account is generally used. Rather, it is mandatory for the purpose of holding and dealing in your securities of the listed company. So that is not going to be impacted on account of such change. Coming to the next one, please.
Perfecto. Thank you so much, Mr.
Yeah, part, I think. So what I'm doing now, I'm requesting my colleague Rubal to take us through the relevant tax sort of related framework.
Yeah.
Having said, let me reiterate it. As I said, this is a high level about immigration from the exchange control regulation. There are sort of lot of permutation combination we can work around, during the course of immigration, depending upon the end purpose which an immigrant is sort of looking forward to achieve. Over to Rubal.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
Rubal, I'll just firstly thank you so much, Mr. Harish. Your slide on that properties and bank account was such a lovely slide because many people have those questions that as they move into the new country, what will happen to their current holdings. So I think that was a lovely slide. Rubal, I will just as per the plan have invite Cristina to give an overview of a detailed plan, different schemes of the immigration. And I'm just also sorry, guys, I have to do a dirty job of keeping a check on the time also. So we are like another 14 minutes into finish the call. So I will first have Christina talk about the leading uh, programs of the immigration, and then towards the end, Rubal would like to end that call before the question answers on the taxation part. I hope that is fine with you, Rubal. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Okay. So just watch through the time. And again, that's a dirty job for me to do. So over to you, Christina, now.
Thank you, Ashish. So being mindful of the time, Stephen and I will take you through some of the temporary and permanent resident options that we typically advise our clients on. At Green and Spiegel, the approach we take is we try to find the fastest and most efficient option for our clients. So with respect to work permits, we often use the intercompany transferee work permit. So there's the way this category works is you have to be continuously employed for a multinational company for at least 1 year in the last 3 years in a position as an executive, senior manager, or a specialized knowledge category. So executives and senior managers are pretty self-explanatory, but with respect to specialized knowledge workers, what the Canadian government is looking at is that there's a specific skill set or a specific method that the worker uses that is unique both to the organization as well as to the industry in Canada. So a lot of it has to do with fleshing out, the types of work that the companies do and what the particular employee does. So the classic example would be an IT professional where they've developed a specific method, a specific tool that they've essentially made so specialized that there's nobody else that can work with it. So these are the three categories that we often bring people up or bring people to Canada with. And the biggest one is the startup visa, ICT, where essentially if you want to open up a new operation in Canada, you would have to still meet the same requirements. They have to be employed for the the multinational company outside of Canada for 1 year and 3 years. They have to be currently employed as an executive, senior manager, specialized knowledge, and we have to show the government that the new entity in Canada has a business plan, why you want to expand into Canada, and the key elements of that is having a business plan. So Ashish and I work very closely on those business plans, so he's well aware of what those require. And that's where most of the detail comes in. So it's market research, understanding what the financials will be for the new Canadian operation, understanding why you want to come into Canada, how many Canadians and permanent residents you'll be hiring. So the Canadian government wants to expand businesses opening up in the country. And one of those key considerations is that you're creating jobs for Canadians or permanent residents. And the other key consideration when we're doing these applications is the financial support. So showing that the foreign company has sufficient finances and that those finances can be brought into the Canadian operation as well. One of the things to be mindful for the startup visa ICT is that the initial work permit is only issued for a 1-year period and then can be renewed up to 5 years for specialized knowledge workers and 7 years for senior managers and executives. So the idea here is they cap the amount of time you can spend in Canada, and then we can transition them into permanent residency. So Stephen can take us through the next few work permit categories.
Sure. Canada has entered into free trade agreements with many countries, and if you have a passport of one of the countries, then it is easier for you to enter the labor market on a temporary basis. Remember that all free trade agreements are all temporary. Canada has been negotiating with India for many, many years to try to get a free trade agreement, and hopefully we will have one soon, but we'll have to wait and see how that works. The next area is called reciprocal employment, and it really applies to companies that are multinational, that have offices around the world. And if you can demonstrate that the Canadian company is sending Canadians abroad to work in foreign countries, then you can make the request to state that this particular employee who is living in India, working for the multinational, would like to be transferred to Canada, and then you show the number of Canadians that are abroad versus the number of Canadians that are inside the company in Canada. And then, of course, you would ask to have some of the Indian nationals come to work inside of Canada based on reciprocity. Another area is a special program for people that speak French. And quite candidly, if you find a skilled job, even a medium skilled job now, and you are able to speak French, then all that is required is a letter from the Canadian company indicating that they'd like to hire you. You must demonstrate as a person using this program that you speak, read, write, and listen at a certain level of French, and then you can obtain a work permit without testing the labor market. And let's talk about this concept of testing the labor market. Generally, the rule is that anybody who wishes to work in Canada must have the employer test the labor market. And when I say test the labor market, I mean that the Canadian employer must demonstrate to a department in the government that the particular job that they need filled cannot be filled in Canada by Canadians or permanent residents. And once they've demonstrated that, then they will get a special certificate, that being the employer, saying that they have tested the Canadian labor market. There is no one in Canada that can do this job that's a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, and therefore we will let the Indian national take that job and come into Canada. And it's called a labor market impact assessment. It can be a very difficult process in some respects because you must recruit for a month, demonstrate that you've tried to find people, and if you can't, you would get this labor market impact assessment. And we did, however, meaning we, the Canadian government, recognize that certain skilled jobs just can't be filled by Canadians. Everyone recognizes that. And the government has provided a list of we call it the global talent list. And if you do any of these particular jobs and you find a Canadian employer that would be willing to offer you a job in this particular area, then you can get that special labor certificate extremely quickly. You don't have to advertise that being a employer in Canada. And these applications are generally taking 10 days inside of Canada to get that special certificate. Then once that special certificate is issued, then the foreign national will take that certificate, which is the LMIA, and apply for a work permit. And that work permit is actually processed inside of Canada generally, and is done within, 10 to 20 business days. So it's a very fast process because these jobs are urgently needed inside of Canada, and the government recognizes that and processes them very quickly. And maybe, Cristina, you can talk about the next slides.
Yeah, so on the same vein of the government recognizing that certain LMIA applications and work permit applications have to be processed on a more expedited basis, recently at the end of 2023, and it's been implemented now in January of 2024, the government introduced the recognized employer pilot for LMIAs. So what this allows is that if you are an employer that has used the program, and have successfully followed all the rules, and you have 3 positive LMIAs in the past 5 years, they allow you to process the LMIA on a much more expedited basis. And you'll get the LMIA quicker, and the LMIA will be valid for much longer. So it's valid for 36 months as opposed to the typical LMIA that's valid for 12 months. So the government introduced this, if we go to the next slide, they introduced this at the end of 2023. Phase 1 was for agricultural workers, because in Canada, a big part of our foreign workers are agricultural workers that help with our farming. But phase 2 that was introduced at the beginning of this year is in relation to other employers for higher skilled positions, and you'll see some of those occupations on the right-hand side of the slide. You'll see that for engineering managers, architects, land surveyors, etc. If your occupation is on this list and you're an employer that is trusted, you can get your LMIA on an expedited basis. Now, in my opinion, one of the best things about coming to Canada, and one of the ways that we're able to get executives and high-level individuals into Canada, is that they can bring their family members with them. So one of the things to be mindful of is, if you are bringing an executive into Canada, their family members can come to Canada for the duration of their work permit. So if you have a CEO of a company, their spouse can come to Canada. So a spouse in Canada is either you're married or you're common law, meaning you've cohabitated for 1 year continuously. The spouse can get a work permit for the same duration as the principal applicant, and their children can get study permits for the same duration, meaning they can attend school without having to pay fees, and everybody is eligible for healthcare coverage once they've come into the particular provinces. So this is a great way to get people into Canada and to help the families transition their way into Canada and then transition to permanent residency as well.
And before Cristina talks about express entry, it's really important to understand that if your mom or dad enters Canada on a work permit, many of the universities do not charge dependent children, those are people under the age of 22, foreign student fees. So they pay the same fees that my children pay. So you're looking at a fee of 6,000 to 7,000 Canadian dollars versus 30,000 to 40,000 Canadian dollars. So that's a really good incentive with respect to people coming. So let's talk about express entry, Cristina.
So express entry, as we said, as Stephen indicated previously, it's about transitioning people into permanent residency. So the key way to apply for immigration through one of the economic categories is through the express entry system. So the categories that can use the express entry system are the federal skilled worker category, the Canadian experience class, and the federal skilled trades. Most people that are coming into Canada on a work permit, so on that temporary basis, transition to permanent residency through the Canadian experience class. So what that means is they've worked in Canada for 1 year continuously on a full-time basis. They've completed their English language scores. They've received a score, a CLB of 7 or above, and they have gotten their foreign degree assessed. So in order for them to apply, they would create their profile in the express entry system. They're given points based on their age, education, language, abilities, and work experience. They're put into the pool of qualified candidates. Depending on their score, they will be given an invitation to apply. When they receive the invitation to apply, they have 60 days to submit the application, and processing times, I would say, are around 6 to 12 months currently, and they can apply for permanent residency. So they label it express because really the transition from when you apply for permanent residency to become a permanent resident is 12 months. So this is the key pathway that most of our applicants on temporary permits make their way to permanent residency. And then for candidates that aren't, sorry about that. Go ahead,
Go
Stephen.
ahead. No,
I- No, and I was saying if this particular category isn't optimal for the client because perhaps their age, they're over the age of 40, 50, then we can find other ways to get them permanent residency. And Stephen will take us through the startup visa program and perhaps even the provincial nominee as well.
Yeah, well, recognizing the time, I'll talk very quickly about the startup program. The startup visa program is the only program in Canada that's a business program that provides individuals directly with permanent resident status to Canada. And basically, it's a program that wants to facilitate innovative ideas in Canada. And you can enter Canada through this program if you either have an innovative idea or you want to help a company that has an innovative idea. The criteria basically is that you have to speak, read, and write and listen English at a basic level, and that you want to get involved in this program. You have to contact various groups that evaluate this innovative idea. If the innovative idea is considered appropriate, then one of these three groups on the screen would give you a letter of support, which would let you apply for immigration. But it's important to understand that there is a large backlog in this category, and the government has prioritized people that have put capital into an innovative company that they are bringing to Canada, and those applications are being processed much more quickly than individuals that really haven't put any money into those categories. So the startup visa program is a good program for people that really can't make it in the express entry system, that are willing to get involved in a business. And really, it's the only real program in the whole world, except for France, that Canada has with respect to this program. And those are our general comments on the immigration pathways to Canada.
Ashish, I will just take 30 seconds here because I just looked at the startup visa options here. So, just to give perspective also, again, to complement what Stephen was sharing here. So, if let's say being a resident, we do invest outside India, let's say in Canada, in a normal venture or maybe startup. So, when we do investment in the startup, so we get some kind of additional benefit or relaxation in terms of the Indian exchange control regulations. So just take an example that today I got shifted to Canada and I got a startup, there, and I'm getting funding from India, maybe from Business Associate. So while I'm running a startup, getting benefit privileges there in Canada, at the same time there are some kind of enhanced, privileges, exemptions within India in terms of the exchange control regulations. So the relaxations are also high from Indian exchange control regulations if you do overseas investment in a startup entity in Canada. Just to bring a perspective.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And again, the reason of this call, Harish ji and Mr. Stephen, is to bring those value addition point together so that anybody taking a decision have a comprehensive view of what is benefit getting across the borders. Lovely point. Yeah. So thanks a lot, Stephen and Christina, as always. So now I will request Rubal to please walk us quickly. Sorry to use the word quickly. You know, over the Indian taxation. Again, we like to keep 5 minutes for the question and answers. Anyway, we are always welcoming other questions also offline also. But over to you now, Rubal. For quickly walk through in that.
Sure. Thank you, Ashish, first of all, for the introduction and for helping us with the slides. And hello, everyone. So I'll just come to the point straight away. First of all, we want to see what is a taxable unit under the Indian Income Tax Act and the Canadian Income Tax Act. And India and Canadian government has entered into an agreement called Double Taxation Avoidance Agreement. This agreement is helpful to see and determine the liability of taxation where dual taxability arises. Suppose a resident is taxable in India and Canada for some reason, Then we go to the provisions of the DTA and we check the taxability. I'll come to that later, but this is just an introduction about the double taxation avoidance agreement. Now, the taxable unit everywhere in India, Canada, and as per the DTA is a person, which is a common definition. As you can see, it is an individual. It can be a company in India. It can be a corporation in Canada, which is the same. But the DT also recognizes a company, even a trust is included as a person. And for taxability under the Canadian Income Tax Act, the source has to be in Canada, which means a Canadian resident having an asset or any property outside Canada will be taxable on that property in Canada. On the same hand, if a non-resident of Canada has a property in Canada, obviously he will be taxable on the income arising from the Canadian asset. Now, I'll just quickly run through the income which is not taxable in Canada under the Canadian Income Tax Act. Now, those incomes include gifts and inheritance, then death benefits paid from a life insurance policy in Canada, then the amount received from lottery winnings or winnings from betting or gambling for simple recreation or enjoyment. These are taxable in India, but in Canadian Income Tax Act, these are non-taxable. Then income earned from tax-free savings account. Also income from international organizations of which Canada is a member, for example, the United Nations and the related agencies which are there. Also, a Canadian resident can get a foreign tax credit depending on the fact that the person has paid tax in the other country. If you have paid tax on a transaction in India, suppose, so you can claim a foreign tax credit in Canada for that same income. Ashish, can we come to the next slide, please?
Yeah, sure.
Now coming
Steve,
to the
can you help me?
resident, yeah. Now coming to the residency for individuals under Indian Income Tax Act, one has to stay in India for a period of 182 days or more, whereas in Canada no such requirement is there. You only have to see the residency with respect to the individuals where the dwelling place is there in Canada or not, or whether the spouse or the common law partner is residing in Canada or not. Also, the dependence residency can be seen to determine the residency of a person. Now, there is a concept of deemed residency in Canada, which means that if you have stayed in Canada for more than 183 days, you can be deemed as a resident in Canada. As per the double taxation avoidance agreement, in cases where dual residency comes, in that case, the DTA says that you will be taxable in the state in which you are resident. Suppose if I am resident in India, as per the DTA, I will be taxable under Indian Income Tax Act. Now, there can be cases where a resident is taxable in both the countries. For that purpose, the DTA provides a tiebreaker clause. The tiebreaker clause, like we see in the third column, the 4 criteria are there. First criteria is you see the state of permanent home of the individual. If the individual has permanent home in both the countries, then we go to the next criteria, which is the habitual abode. If the person, for instance, has habitual abode in both the countries, then we go to the nationality. For example, if he has nationality of Canada and UK, then in that case, and that will be a rare of the rarest cases, then the governments of both the countries will step in, and then that will be decided. The residency status will be decided by the competent authorities of both the countries. Now we come to the next slide, which is residency for corporations. Corporation, the tiebreaker clause, which I just discussed, is the same. Apart from this, in Canada, the residency is determined only on the carrying on business in Canada. If somebody is carrying on business in Canada, that will suffice and it will be treated as a residency. Now coming to the next slide, which is very important, which is on capital gains. Now this is very interesting. In India, one has to pay capital gains tax on the entire capital gains on the entire income which the person earns. However, in Canada, the capital gains tax is earned is incurred only on the 50% of the capital gain. For example, if a person earns an income of 100 rupees as a capital gain, so on 50 rupees, which is 50% of the capital gain, that will be taxable in Canada. So 50 rupees will form part of my total income, and that will be taxable according to the slab in which I fall. Therefore, we say there is no single capital gains tax rate in Canada. It varies from the slab in which we fall. Now, interestingly, the immovable property, the alienation of ships or aircraft of enterprise and other property, which will include the movable property, for example, the shares, stocks, and everything. For taxability of all of this, it depends on the source. Where the source of immovable property is situated, where the shares are located, wherever, if it is in India, it will be taxable in India. If it is in Canada, it will be taxable in Canada. Now, coming to the capital loss in Canada, one can claim the capital gains loss for previous 3 years, and it can be carried forward for future infinite period. Like in India, we have a period of limitation to carry forward a capital loss for 7 years. However, in Canada, the capital loss can be carried forward for a number of years. Now, coming to the next slide, which talks about the taxation of interest, taxation of trust, I'm sorry. So, trust is taxable in Canada and in India in individual capacity. And there are a lot of disclosure requirements which the Canadian government has recently come up. And that we can go to the next slide for, which talks about the taxation mandatory rules. Now, this is also a very interesting development which has happened last year. What the Canadian government has done is they have listed out certain reportable transactions. Now, those reportable transactions, suppose three parties enter into any transaction, all the three parties have to report to the Canadian Revenue Authority about the nature of transaction. The authority only has to verify whether there is a tax benefit or not. This reporting requirement is, there is an obligation for the reporting on the auditors of the transaction also. The accountant who has audited and who has helped in the transaction is also supposed to report the transaction, and this has to be done within 90 days of entering into the transaction, which where we can loosely say that this is a real-time alert which we have to give to the Canadian Revenue Agency. If one does not report these transactions to the Canadian Revenue Agency, it can there can be penalties levied on the company, which can amount to 25% of the tax benefit which the company is deriving, if at all there is any tax benefit, and the accountant will also be liable to penalties under this. Now, coming to the next slide. These are just important procedures which are mentioned in the double taxation avoidance agreement between India and Canada. Mutual agreement procedure is another very upcoming thing that is there. In the mutual agreement procedure, suppose a resident in Canada and India feels that the provisions of double taxation avoidance agreement, suppose with respect to a permanent establishment or attribution of profits, will not be decided as per the benefits given in the double taxation avoidance agreement. In that case, a person can opt for a mutual agreement procedure. Next is the non-discrimination clause, which says that if a non-resident of Canada works in Canada for any business or enters into any transaction, he will be treated in parity with the Canadian residents. So there'll be a non-discrimination between a non-resident Canadian and a resident Canadian. Next is the exchange of information. It is a formal thing which the governments have entered into, where the government of India and Canada will exchange information with each other regarding any transaction or any resident which they want. And then the elimination of double taxation is the whole aim of entering into the double taxation avoidance agreement.
I think Ashish, this is end our slide. So while concluding on,
Perfect.
just again a minute
Yeah,
only. Ashish, so I'm saying this is end of our slide, but while concluding, while at the time of doing immigration to Canada, it is a win-win position, certainly from the Canada law perspective in terms of the enhanced income, better equality, better social security, so on and so forth. So from the Indian regulation perspective, it has to be a thought-through implementation in terms of do's and don'ts, so that you should not get
that's
into
true.
a kind of trouble in terms of any kind of lapse which suddenly is unintended, primarily on account of taxations and exchange control regulations. Yeah, so we
Very
are
true.
we are
Very true.
open to
Very true.
any further FAQ on this. Would be happy to take any further Q&A on this from Indian law perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think excellent session. Once again, big thanks to Stephen, Christina, Harishi, and Rubal. This is a very unique session because we combined for any businessman and high net worth, all the important points which are relevant for them in their desire or objective to, move to different countries, and especially in this case of Canada, we are talking about. Now, and again, this session has been recorded, so I will request Eve to share the link of the recording. We have to because we overshot the time limit we have set for the webinar. So we would let the question answer now be answered through an email. So I have already written on the chat that participants can send maximum 2 questions to us, and accordingly we will reply to them. And my biggest thanks to the excellent knowledge based people. Again, I'm referring to Stephen, Christina, and Harish and Rubal again. Big thanks to Eve and Esther for supporting all the aspects of the webinar. And I hope the participants did like this thing. We would love to repeat this more, seeing the feed if we get more, encouragement in this regard. But an excellent, unique, and very much required section. So that's with that vote of my thanks. I think I will now like to close this webinar. And wherever you are, enjoy your day, enjoy your lunch, and wish you all and stay blessed. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much,
Thank
my
you,
dear.
everyone.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Bye bye.